9 U.S. Presidents Assassinated by Globalists by Larry Engel. This article, number 4, is about the assassination of President James A. Garfield, the 20th President of the United States, in 1881. The assassin, Charles Julius Guiteau, stated in court that he shot the president, but he did not kill him. He died of medical malpractice. This statement is true. Guiteau is very interesting because of the doublespeak. On one hand, we have the official story that gets thinner and thinner the more we dig into it. And on the other hand, we have the premise of this series of articles that 9 U.S. presidents were assassinated by the globalists because the presidents tried to represent the interests of the people and of the nation, and thus became against the banking cartel's agenda of ruling the world. I use my observation, my intuition, and my opinion to create this video and the article that I wrote for it. Today, in March 2014, there is a strong movement to prevent you, the listener, from hearing this series of articles on the assassination of 9 U.S. presidents. The thrust is being made by the claim of infringement of copyright laws. But copyright laws are rather complex, and they allow the use of copyrighted material under certain circumstances, and I am careful to stay safely within those areas. As an investigative reporter, I want to demonstrate and simplify to the viewer the truth of what is really happening, which can be very complex. I openly claim that it is unlawful for Jewish communities to join the Mossad in espionage in the United States. This position, in at least 2 of my videos, has caused powerful people to want to silence this series and to prevent you from hearing what I have to say. I use my observation, my intuition, and my opinion to explore these events. The official assassination line is that Guiteau was an insane, disappointed office seeker with messianic visions. On the other hand, my observations: 1. In court, it was proven that he was not insane, and therefore he was hanged. Observation 2. He was promised by persons in authority in the U.S. Department of State that he would be appointed to a European consulship for helping with the presidential race, then falsely informed that Garfield had prevented it. Garfield didn't even know about it. My third observation: it is very clear that Guiteau had a strong globalist political agenda, and there lay his real motive for shooting Garfield. The assassin openly stated he believed Garfield was a serious threat to the banks and to the bank's agenda. Removing Garfield for the bankers would open his way to the State Department position as a reward, is what he thought. Guiteau wrote to President Chester Arthur after he became president, "My inspiration is a godsend to you, and I presume that you appreciate it. Never think of Garfield's removal as a murder. It was an act of God, resulting from a political necessity for which he was responsible." Now, President Arthur and Guiteau had met face-to-face before the assassination. And now, with this statement, Arthur is supposed to thank Guiteau for making him president. As an aside, this is a globalist trick and use of sedition that can weaken the nation. The idea is to get the public to suspect the vice president who steps up from the assassination, rather than for the people to focus on the real assassins and their plans. They use this frequently, and it helps them to escape and weaken the president. Would it make sense to kill the President of the United States if the Vice President was going to continue the same policies? Somehow, they must have some way of making an agreement with the Vice President, or controlling him, or bringing him up from some other agenda that they know that their interests will be served before they assassinate a president. My fourth observation: the Messianic visions is an interesting propaganda thrust, because it is intended to claim that the President of the United States, Garfield, was assassinated by a Christian minister. But was he really a Christian minister? No, he wasn't. The globalist agenda is Luciferian and Masonic, and they have a deep hatred of Christians and a fear of a secure, moral society in general. To me, this says that Guiteau was very carefully selected by the Luciferian globalists for this major operation ahead of time, such that this slander of Christianity could also be extensively promoted as part of the overall political scenario. There was also a song written and extensively performed to push the idea on the public. "Come all ye tender Christians, wherever you may be, and likewise pay attention to these few lines from me," and it says Guiteau. So the popular song about Guiteau. He was a member of the Theosophical sex cult similar to the Masonic one of Madame Helen Blavatsky. This cult practiced group marriage, where older adults, both male and female, introduced children to sex. The children produced in this cult were owned by the cult, and not the parents, who were kept at a distance. They practiced eugenics, known as stripiculture, where only certain cult members were allowed to have sex, and a special wing was constructed in the Oneida Community Mansion House for this. This produced 58 children, 9 of which were fathered by the founder Noyes. Noyes later fled from the law to Canada for having sex with minors. The Oneida community cult was communistic, and it was not like any New Testament Christian religion known. But it was located in New York, which also housed the Globalist bankers' headquarters, so they did not have to look far for their fall guy and their assassin. Guiteau obtained a law license in Chicago, and the majority of his cases were for collection of debts. So he was in close contact with the banks and with the corporate monopoly, as well as with the courts. The point here is that they knew Guiteau before the assassination. He was their man. The gun is a very important item in the globalist assassination planning. Guiteau, who knew little about guns, was contacted by their agent, Maynard, who gave him the money, told him where to go to buy the gun, and what caliber gun was needed. This was a large caliber .442 Webley British Bulldog revolver. Guiteau chose the one with the pearl handles instead of the one with the wooden handles as he had been directed. When Guiteau picked the gun, it's likely he picked the one that could be traced back to the owner, the one with the pearl handle. But not to worry, that gun disappeared. Now who was holding the evidence? That spikes my intuition. Why would the gun disappear? However, the one with wooden grips ended up in a museum, and I have no idea how that happened. The police come to the railroad station where Guiteau has just shot the President of the United States in the back. Do they take the gun? No. They escort him, walk him to the police station, but he still has a gun. And when he gets to the police station, he voluntarily hands over the gun. Since the assassin believed he was to be appointed to a European consulship, we might ask ourselves if the Secretary of State, James G. Blaine, was working for the Globalists. Reports indicate he met with the assassin on several occasions and was guiding the unguarded president in the train station when he was shot in the back. The premise of this series of articles is that 9 U.S. presidents were assassinated for their policies that threatened the globalists' monetary control. So this kind of question is key. The question about what were the loyalties of the Secretary of State. Control of the U.S. State Department has always been a major globalist objective. JFK stated he was told by the bankers that his entire political campaign would be financed for him if he would turn over the State Department to them. JFK asked Henry Kissinger, "Are they joking?" Early in his career, Secretary of State Blaine was a protectionist, protecting American jobs and businesses with high tariffs. But later on, he took up the globalist agenda of low tariffs. Now, railroad promotion and construction were important issues in Blaine's time, and as a result of his interest and support, Blaine was widely suspected of corruption in the awarding of railroad charters. The bankers controlled the supply of gold, and they wanted gold-backed dollars. Now, Blaine, speaking several times on the matter, said that the greenback dollars, that is paper treasury notes, not backed by gold, the ones that Abraham Lincoln created, had only ever been an emergency measure to avoid bankruptcy during the Civil War. Blaine called the idea of the nation using greenbacks as a repudiation of the nation's promise to investors, which was made when the only currency was gold. Now, the greenback dollars of Lincoln were debt-free, meaning no national debt. He had refused the loans from the banks. Using them took power away from the bankers, who controlled the supply of gold, and the bankers could exploit a depression or a panic by reducing the amount of gold coins circulating in the nation. they could print paper money in Europe and buy gold coins, then use it to create panics in the USA. If you think the debate should be between the use of paper money or gold and silver coins, that is, from commodity money or fiat money, you might want to think a little more clearly about this matter. Because from early as 1782, panics were created when they only used gold coins as money, because somebody controlled the volume of gold in circulation, and they had large stockpiles of gold, and they could cause inflation and depression. People who are very wealthy and who stockpile gold can do that.
Rothschild claimed to be Jewish. Not the nationality of a Jew, but Jew in terms of belief in God and a follower of divine revelation. But was Mr. Rothschild a moral man? Here's a man that had 5 sons, and he sent his 5 sons into 5 countries. One son went to England, one son to France, one to Austria, one to Italy, and another remained in Germany with the father. And from these sons, and the money that these sons had, they worked and maneuvered and manipulated until they gained control of the central banks of England, France, Austria, Italy, and Germany. The control of these central banks went into the hands of individuals whose interests were not necessarily in harmony with the best interests of that nation. These privately owned central banks became the printer of the money and the extenders of credit of that particular nation.
Now, go on about the Secretary of State Blaine. His legacy is that he took our nation away from America for Americans, called isolationists by the globalists, and directed it into the entanglements with foreign nations warned against by President George Washington. There is clear evidence that Secretary of State Blaine was indeed a globalist. But then, why would the globalists consider President Garfield to be a threat to their power? The president's political rhetoric was in the same Republican vein, and he won noble trumps from his fellow party members. However, President Garfield in the White House was a monetary expert, well-informed, a lighthouse that could kill the Pharisee mastodon that had roamed the earth devouring nations since before the Crusades. And of course, they were in the government bond business. The globalist bankers were in the government bond business, indebting governments and actually taking them over. At the trial, Guiteau's lawyers could have got him off on an insanity plea, but he proved them wrong. And then he was silenced forever, like a key dangling on a chain. He was hanged from a scaffold in June 30th, 1882. At the trial, the globalists had their ace in the hole to ensure nothing would escape the prosecution team that could expose their game. The lawyer was a prototype of the 20th century Illuminati, who shuffled between high-level appointed government positions in Washington, D.C. and private sector legal practice in New York City. His name was Elihu Root. He was paid off for his service with a Nobel Prize in 1912. That's interesting. President Obama got one of those. They must hand them out as sort of payoffs. Root served as president or chairman of the Carnegie Endowment for the International Peace, the Carnegie Institution of Washington, and the Carnegie Corporation of New York. President Garfield had the second shortest tenure in presidential history. He was president for only 4 months. He was born in a log cabin. Garfield, perhaps, was the poorest man ever to become president. He worked as a sailor laborer on the Ohio Canal. He worked as a part-time teacher and a carpenter and even as a janitor. I love this quote. This is a wonderful quote. I never met a ragged boy in the street without feeling that I may owe him a salute, for I know not what possibilities may be buttoned up under his coat, said President Garfield. Garfield was an ordained Christian minister of the Disciples of Christ Church. Both he and his wife were devoted Christians. I believe in God, and I trust myself in his hands, he said. This would send up red flags to the sinister European black nobility, whose favorite ancestor was Vlad Dracula, the Impaler, the real bloodline Count Dracula of the story. They would also consider President Garfield to be a peasant, and under their rules of the peerage, legally they could commit any crime against him and remain untouchable. The globalists are vigorously anti-Christian and addicted to wealth, as are the Bilderbergers today. That is a form of insanity. For 9 terms until 1880, Garfield represented Ohio's 19th Congressional District. He was a congressman. As chairman of the House Committee on Appropriations, he became an expert in financial matters and advocated high protective tariffs. He grew to the level of expert on banking and monetary matters by serving on key committees. He held various positions, including chairman of the Banking and Currency Committee, the Appropriations Committee, the Military Affairs Committee. He was also a member of the House Ways and Means Committee. During Garfield's congressional terms, debates raged between legislators who demanded that all U.S. money be backed by gold, and the civil rights and the greenbackers who wanted to issue paper currency and coin silver more freely in an attempt to alleviate pressing debts, especially those of struggling farmers, and to fight any form of depression. Now, this is a very important issue in the political power contest between the European bankers and a free republic. And I feel I need to clarify. The bankers and the railroad barons were called gold bugs. They wanted all paper money backed by gold. This is because they had stockpiles of gold and could control the volume of gold that circulated as coins. This is how a panic is manufactured. They could cause a depression, and then they could buy up with their great wealth and assets anything that fell under hard times, that the bankers had actually created the hard times. Early on, Garfield was in this political group, but as he gained more knowledge, his views began to mature into wisdom and for the benefit of our nation. The greenbackers wanted the use of paper money with no gold or silver backing. These would be treasury notes like those issued by President Abraham Lincoln. And he managed this paper money very well, so there was no depression and no inflation, and also no national debt. And he used the money in such a way as to win the war without creating a national debt. But this kind of money can be easily mishandled, as it was with the Continental Dollar during the Revolutionary War. Now, in the Revolutionary War, the Continental Dollar, that was a paper dollar, but it was very poorly misused, and the result was that it became worthless. Now, these issues that we're talking about are very important, so I hope you will review them if you haven't caught on the first time I presented. The civil rights are more complex. First, we have to understand that at the time, silver coins had become fiat money, not commodity money. This means that the value stamped on the coin was more than the value of silver that it contained. Like paper money in the same way. Paper is not worth anything, but it's got a value printed on it, and that's its value. Well, here we have a silver coin, but doesn't have enough silver in it to make up the value printed on the face. So in a coin that was $1, maybe only 75 cents worth of silver was there. Traditionally, anyone with a bar of silver could go to the government and have it made into coins for a small fee. This means that there was no control over the volume of money in circulation, and the value of the silver coins could rise or drop unexpectedly at any time. So if you bought a horse for 100 silver coins, the next day it might only be worth 90, or it might be worth 150. As an expert, Garfield began to see a better way and a solution. He knew the various political advocates did not clearly understand the monetary system. And boy, is that ever true today. Our congressmen and state representatives have no idea how the Federal Reserve works. As a single congressman, he could do little. But as president, he could follow the example of Lincoln and possibly improve on it. Lincoln said no to the bankers' loans. This special knowledge made Garfield a very serious threat to the globalists. He would, like other presidents who were a threat to the money junkies, be dead upon arrival in the White House. After being elected president, Garfield was able to put his financial expertise, which was acquired through his congressional committee experience, to work by recalling government bonds that were paying 6% interest. The Treasury was able to refinance them at 3.5%, which saved $10 million annually, about 4% of the overall budget at that time. Garfield also had another connection with Lincoln because he appointed his son, Robert Todd Lincoln, as a Secretary of War, I suppose principally because of the prestige associated with the Lincoln name. Garfield said, "Whosoever controls the volume of money in circulation in any country is absolute master of all industry and commerce. And when you realize the entire system is very easily controlled, one way or another, by a few powerful men at the top, you will not have to be told how periods of inflation and depression originate." Garfield didn't want the Congress to both spend the money and operate the monetary system. That was not what he wanted. I think I would agree with that. Garfield enlightened it. It would convert the Treasury of the United States into a manufactory of paper money. It makes the House of Representatives and the Senate, or the caucus of the party, which happens to be in the majority, the absolute dictator of the financial and business affairs of the country. This scheme surpasses all the centralism and the Caesarism that was ever charged upon the Republican Party in the wildest days of the war, or even the events growing out of the war. And Garfield made this comment on a resolution offered by James Weaver of the Greenback Party that the government should issue all money on the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives on the 5th of April in 1880. So, if Garfield would not trust this enormous power to the Congress of the United States, to the House of Representatives, and to the Senate, what would this expert on the monetary system say about the money junkie executives of Goldman Sachs and the ruthless European black nobility having the same power in their hands and no interest in America? At the train station where he was shot, Garfield was totally unguarded. It seems strange, because Skull and Bones had assassinated President William Henry Harrison, President Zachary Taylor, President Abraham Lincoln, attempted to poison James Buchanan, as indicated in a deathbed confession. They also assassinated President James Polk in a more secretive operation, but this was kept from the southern branch of the Skull and Bones group because Polk was popular in the South. Therefore, Polk's assassination was not included in the Southerners' Mardi Gras confession. Today, the Secret Service that guards presidents is overseen by the Secretary of Treasury, usually a banker's man. And when he serves also as the president of the World Bank, he is registered as a foreign agent. The presidents are protected from certain assassins by the Secret Service, but maybe the president is being held prisoner and staged for assassinations on certain occasions. An English nobleman offered the wounded president the use of a 20-room house, Franklin Cottage in New Jersey. The railroad barons had a special track laid from the main line to the door. Obviously, the president would never leave there alive. Did Garfield die of medical malpractice, as his assassin during the trial claimed? It is obvious the doctors killed him. He was attended by Dr. D.W. Bliss, an allopath. Allopaths relied on what they called heroic measures, which usually meant invasive, drastic, and infection-begetting surgery. They didn't know about germ theory at that time, so they infected their patients. They might have even thought that was good, according to some reports. Some days after the president's shooting, his personal physician, one Dr. Baxter, arrived. Baxter was a homeopath, and Bliss was an allopath. They promptly initiated a fistfight over the patient. Baxter backed down, left Bliss in charge, and never saw the president again. Shortly after his move to New Jersey, Garfield's temperature began to elevate. The doctors reopened the wound and enlarged it, using unwashed hands and dirty tools, searching for the bullet. They were unsuccessful. By the time Garfield died in September 19th, his doctors had turned a 3-inch deep, harmless wound into a 20-inch long, contaminated gash stretching from his ribs to his groin and oozing pus each day. This powerful man lingered for 80 days. He certainly wanted to live, wasting away from his robust 220 pounds to a mere 130. The end came on the night of September 19th, and clawing at his chest he moaned, this pain, while suffering a major heart attack, the result of slow blood poisoning infection. The president died a few minutes later. A wonderful president, tortured to death for representing the interests of the people. And I believe that if he had been treated by Dr. Baxter, the homeopath, he would have recovered. The Federal Reserve Bank is owned by private banks. And one of these private banks is Goldman Sachs, spelled S-A-C-H-S. One of their early founders was Samuel Sachs, and his family came from Bavaria, where his name would be spelled S-A-X-E. Bavaria is where the dynasty of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha financed the Illuminati of Adam Weishaupt. Now the deception of the Queen of England is that her name is Windsor, but that's not her name. Her real name, you'll find in any encyclopedia, is Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. So, do we pay our income tax to the government? Do we pay it to the IRS and the IRS give it to the Federal Reserve Bank? Well, you can look at the back of your check. You'll find that it says that the check was given to the Federal Reserve. You'll find no government agency or no government individual ever received your income tax. So maybe we pay our income tax to the Queen of England and don't know it. The premise of this series of articles is that 9 U.S. presidents were assassinated and 4 others were wounded because they wanted to represent the people of the United States. And they knew what President Jackson knew, and President Polk knew, and that President Lincoln knew. These presidents were beginning to see the light on the monetary system. This investigative news reporter hopes that you will take the time to understand these issues and seek out the truth.